Velasco, and thank you for reading. Manny Pacquiao, I suppose. I don't think there will be a problem for Manny.
As it shares great fights. But every once in a while, the mind can also be considered for nothing.
And only here on Para sa Bayan.
That's the opening bell for Round by Round, presented by Eastern Communications. I'm Bill Velasco.
And I'm Ryan Sangalia. Boyd Sison joins us later on in the show.
All right, mabuhay Pilipinas and welcome world. In the news, WBC Bantamweight champion Nonito Donaire calls out WBO Bantamweight champion Janriel Casimero's camp on social media, claiming that they're all talk, but have not contacted his promoter, Richard Schaefer, to actually set up a fight. Donaire and, of course, Casimero have had some history, and he's in particular calling out MP Promotions for not making the fight happen. Ryan, they were already supposed to see action to begin with, right before Nonito pulled out of the fight and Rigondo stepped in.
Yeah, that was sort of our summer surprise, or it was going to be. And then all hell broke loose, and it's unfortunate because that was just one of those guilty pleasure fights that, first off, you don't really expect to see, and it's almost like hey, you know, what if they fought? What would happen? And then out of nowhere, that fight gets announced, and then before we can even process it, it gets called off. Nonito Donaire, of course, cited some of Casimero's comments, claiming that he had disrespected Nonito's manager and wife, Rachel, and I guess that was the bridge too far, and the fight was pulled. And it really seemed like Nonito was canceling the fight out of principle. And that's a real punishment there, because that's a big payday for Casimero, which he lost out on, and B, it was actually a punishment to the rest of the world, because then we had to go see Guillermo Rigondeaux fight. So everyone sort of lost out on that one. There were no winners in that, but hopefully they can put it aside and unify these belts, because that's a great fight. That's a great civil war. That's like Oscar De La Hoya versus Fernando Vargas. That's like Chavez versus Oscar De La Hoya. There's a lot of stuff outside the ring that sort of needs to be worked out there, and a lot of egos, and kind of want to see that happen.
Yeah, but and it's supposedly like a three-horse race, with Naoya Inoue allegedly ducking Casimero, and Casimero, floating the half the peace sign in front of the cameras, and flipping the bird.
He's number one.
Yeah, he's saying he's number one, but with the wrong finger. So he's really carrying himself with a lot of swagger, over the top. Some people would say very rude, but seriously speaking, I don't think Nonito would be ducking Casimero by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, this is a guy who's already the oldest in the weight class to be world champion. He's been a replacement fighter. He's done so many things and accomplished so much. I just really don't see why the fight won't happen.
I think that if the fight doesn't happen, there are a couple reasons. I think number one, Casimero he's a good champion, but he's still not that well known outside of the boxing circles. So you can kind of get away with not fighting him. So Casimero really does need these other guys like Inoue and Donaire to sort of lend their credibility to him, and that's what they were, kind of withholding. Inoue has already mentioned Casimero on social media. He said he wants that fight. They were supposed to fight. The pandemic sort of postponed that fight, or canceled that fight, really. And that fight has not been rescheduled yet. I think that, and then that's certainly not to say anything, because, people are who they are. I think maybe these are just guys who really don't want to be around Casimero. I think that's just I don't think it's because of him as a fighter. I think it's they don't like him as a person. He's not everyone's cup of tea. I get along well with him, but I can understand why Inoue and Donaire are a little bit cross about him.
Would you think that maybe Inoue Casimero fight might happen first? I mean, first of all, who else is on the horizon for Inoue? He's, Rigondeaux's, put himself out of the picture with his running man stint against Casimero, and then Inoue is already beaten Donaire and beat him 2 years ago. So you think that might happen first?
I think that Donaire has something to bring to the table now, though. He won a belt, and so that might entice Inoue. And that was a great fight. That was an amazing fight when Inoue and Donaire went at each other. That was the most vulnerable we'd ever seen in Inoue. I think that Casimiro, of course, he has something to bring to the table as well. He's got a belt, so both guys would be reasonable fights. And I think, though, that Donaire and Inoue have this mutual respect, almost like this mentor-mentee kind of relationship, because they had a relationship when Inoue was coming up. So there might be something there that they can work on. But it's hard to tell. Casimiro didn't do himself many favors with that last performance. And, even if he did get the win over Rigondeaux, Nonito had to sort of have a smile on his face that, he had to kind of be in the ring for 12 rounds, waving at air all night.
Yeah. So you think that might have hurt Casimiro's stock a little bit?
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, I think the people
he couldn't make the fight happen. I think that's what people are saying.
Yeah, but also, like, you get, like, whenever Rigondeaux gets in the ring and, he does all this stuff where, he does the boxing without the offense, you get the kind of boxing hipsters who say, oh, Rigondeaux won that fight, he was robbed. And, they really believe, a lot of it, I think, is performative when they talk about those things. So, like, look at me, I appreciate the boring box that no one else likes. I mean, come on, you got to throw punches to win. Even his own corner was saying that. So, but, enough doubt gets created in people's minds, and you start associating, that guy with a loss, and, that can kind of hurt a guy's credibility a bit. So, yeah, and a little bit, I don't think it helped him at all.
All right. Also in the news on Monday, on Lunes po, rock legend and rabbi Mike Hanupol went on social media at sinabi po niya na nung isang taon, noong 2019, ay nagpagawa po ng mga kanta sa kanya si Manny Pacquiao, at hanggang sa ngayon ay hindi pa siya nababayaran. So Mike Hanupol, of course, the older people would know him from the Juan de la Cruz band. He wrote songs like Laki Salayaw and I think a couple of the songs of Hagibis, which Ryan is very familiar with. And he's saying that you wanted some songs written, a couple of Hebrew songs even. I rented a studio, I hired musicians, and you never paid me. Now, personally, I don't think that this is something that was transacted directly between him and Manny. Could have been a misunderstanding with the Pacquiao's people, and this should be a non-issue that will probably be settled right away. What do you think?
Manny's a man of his word usually, so I don't see why it wouldn't happen. So, but yeah, I hope this doesn't interfere with his opening act for the next Kiss farewell tour. So, hopefully we can get that all settled, and rock and roll can continue.
I have a feeling that's exactly what will happen, because Manny always has a heart for those who are in trouble and those who need help. Mm-hmm. Now let's go on to something that Ryan and I have cooked up for you. Of course, everybody's talking about Manny Pacquiao, his legacy. What will be the next move? Is he going to retire? Is he going to fight again? Ryan and I have each picked out 3 of what we consider to be Manny Pacquiao's greatest hits. All right. I'll go first. We go all the way back 20 years ago to 2001, Manny Pacquiao's first big splash in America when he took on Lelo Leduapa. And I remember this skinny blonde kid whose name the announcers could not pronounce, taking on Leduapa with only a couple of weeks to go, right? I understand the top contenders didn't want to face Leduapa, and Freddie Roach said, we're going to beat him. And all the American sports writers were saying, you're crazy. And then Manny Pacquiao knocks his block off. Yes,
Well, that
go ahead,
would be
Ryan.
Javier Castillejo versus Oscar De La Hoya on the card, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Well,
that's that was 20 years ago. Imagine that.
can I ask you, like, because I remember that from being in America, and like that was sort of the first time I had really seen him in action. What were the expectations before that? Back home in the Philippines.
Well, except for Freddie Roach and those who had seen Manny training, everybody really just had written him off. They said, this poor kid came all the way to America, you know, he's gonna get murdered in his first outing. He might get disillusioned. He might give up boxing after this, and all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, 6 rounds in, boom, the was on the canvas, and it really changed everything.
Well, for me, the fight that really broke out Manny Pacquiao, because I had known of him, I watched his fights, and it was always very exciting. But when he went to that next level was in 2003 when he fought Marco Antonio Barrera, and it was sort of that same situation. It was like, Barrera was the established fighter. He was in the top 5 pound for pound for almost everyone at that point, and there was this expectation that, yeah, Pacquiao is tough. He's hungry. He's got power, but he's moving up in weight. He's fighting a guy with an iron chin, and he is, just not going to have the experience to do what he needs to do against, Barrera. And Barrera was like, okay, he had been out there and in wars with Eric Morales. What can Manny Pacquiao do? Well, it turned out a lot, and he really. Pacquiao went out there and just drubbed him. He beat him up. And it's one thing to beat a guy but to beat a guy up so bad and then, the corner has to step in and stop it. That was just an amazing performance by Pacquiao. And, I remember Jim Lampley's call. He said, a star is born. And that's what happened. And, all these years later, we're still talking about Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah, but I really feel sad for Marco Antonio Barrera, because don't you get this feeling that he sort of got lost in the shuffle? There's Morales, there's Marquez, and Barrera initially, and then Barrera gives up his title, and then all of a sudden he's no longer in part of the equation. He ended up just managing and training fighters after that.
Yeah, but Barrera, he, in a lot of ways, I felt like he overshadowed Morales because of his style, because Barrera's style was closer to Chavez, and I think that's the style that people really like, that body punching style. Morales had a longer body, wasn't a natural left hooker to the body. So in some ways, it was harder for him. Not much harder, obviously, because he was still a beloved fighter. But he didn't connect as easily and naturally as Barrera did.
Right. For me, second on my list is the second Pacquiao Morales fight. This was in January of 2006. This was the second in a string of 15 straight victories for Manny Pacquiao. He went 6.5 years before that Timothy Bradley farce. And before that, Pacquiao had beaten Hector Velasquez, so that should have started the string. But this was avenging his defeat in the first fight against Eric Morales. And what struck me was, I remember at the time that the Philippines was going through a very hard time economically. A lot of people were desperate. A lot of people were looking for somebody to inspire them. And this was the fight that sort of flipped the switch on in the Philippines. Manny Pacquiao all of a sudden becomes a hero because he defeated Eric Morales. And this sort of catapulted him to really immortality or heroic stature here in the Philippines, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I remember that too, because Pacquiao had some momentum coming off of the Velasquez fight, and then Morales had, I think, stepped up in weight and lost to Zahir Rahim. So that, there was that, that Manny Pacquiao had to be boosted. He had seen the guy get beat in the previous fight, but very different style. Manny Pacquiao went out there and just took the fight to him. And Morales was there for, the first few rounds. But when Pacquiao knocked him back with the left hand in the round 2 and sent him really into the ropes, I was like, whoa, because I was not used to seeing Morales get hurt like that. And you always wondered, like, how many drops would it take to finally break the stone? And then we saw, I believe that was round 10. You know, it was one punch too many, and Morales went down, and it was really an amazing sight to see Pacquiao avenge that loss.
Who's who you got at number 2 on your list?
Well, for me, number 2 was Oscar De La Hoya. And now
Oh,
that,
yes.
you know, it's a kind of an interesting situation there, because I remember buying into the hype of like, oh, Oscar's too big. And, you know, in my mind, I only can understand logic. I have a finite mind. And a bigger man, you know, even if he's older, almost always beats the smaller man. And by the end of 8 rounds, it was almost as if Pacquiao was the bigger man and Oscar was the smaller guy. You remember there was a politician who introduced a bill who said, "Oh, we're going to prevent this fight from happening because it'll hurt the Filipino spirit too much if Pacquiao gets hurt." And Pacquiao went out there and you know, just treated Oscar De La Hoya like a punching bag. You know, he was too fast. Oscar couldn't catch up, and he was getting at angles, and you know, he was just tagging Oscar at will, and then forced him to retire on a stool, literally retire.
Yeah, exactly. I remember Manny himself saying that that was his favorite fight, and you know, De La Hoya had actually not fought at that weight for 6 years, and he was getting a lot of grief from the sports media in the U.S. saying, "Why are you picking on this little guy?" You know, they still had him as a favorite because he was the bigger celebrity, he was bigger, and so on. But I understand there was also some wear and tear in one of his shoulders, which might have hurt him in that fight. But again, that's how you cement a legend. You know, your legendary status. For me, the next one on my list is Antonio Margarito, because the Antonio Margarito fight is what you need to complete the set, right? Without that title at that weight division, it's not 8 titles. Plus Margarito, basically Pacquiao saved his career, because this was after the embarrassment of the plaster of Paris, right, in the hand wraps before the Mosley fight. So he couldn't fight in Nevada anymore. So he had to get a license to fight Manny Pacquiao in Texas, but it was in a huge venue, so many people. He was the biggest guy Pacquiao had ever fought, although a lot of people forget. You know, very memorable to me was Pacquiao looking at the referee to stop the fight, because Margarito was really, you know, taking such a pounding, and Pacquiao himself was wondering why the referee wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, you know, it's I asked a fighter one time about, you know, could he tell if, you know, because another fighter had, you know, got an orbital bone fracture. Could he tell by hitting the guy that something was different about what he was hitting? And he said he could. So that night, Antonio Margarito would have really needed some of the plaster of Paris, you know, on his face. But for me, my third pick is Keith Thurman. And the reason I picked that is because it was just, it hurt. This was the first time I remember people concerned, like, oh, Manny's going to get hurt because Thurman hits really hard. And we all felt, you know, at 40 years old, you know, Pacquiao is really vulnerable, and, you know, something bad could happen. And then in the first, and I don't think even Keith Thurman expected that, because he gets knocked down, and he gets, you know, when you go straight back, Manny keeps coming with those punches, following you out, and Thurman made that mistake, and he was on the floor. And that was a real war. That was a fight where I'm looking into like the mid to late rounds, and Pacquiao looks like he's wearing down a bit. And then out of nowhere, you know, he turns that fight around. I think the 10th round with a body shot, and he's got Thurman out, you know, basically out by that body shot, and he wasn't able to catch a second breath, and he wins that fight. At 40 years old, he's a world champion again. Like it was an amazing swan song, and it still has to go for me as one of his greatest outings.
All right, thank you very much, Ryan. That for us would be the list latest hits. We go on to the Eastern Communications Fearless Forecast for today. A very familiar name to you, someone who's been on the national team for so long. Charlie Suarez, a big fixture. Ryan, Charlie's got a fight coming up on September 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's fighting Lawrence Rosas, his fellow Filipino, and that's an 8-rounder. That's in Urdaneta City. And you look at Rosas, he's 9-5-2. Suarez is 7-0, 5-9. Favor Suarez, but I'm gonna go with Suarez by decision. He's an experienced guy. He knows how to survive. I don't think he'll take any unnecessary chances. But I'd like to see Suarez move to 8-0 and try to get onto something bigger because time is not on his side. He's 33 years old.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. You know, at 33, there doesn't seem to be any, title contention, a world title on the horizon. How do you make that happen faster if you're a Charlie Suarez?
Well, I think he's got to get out of the country. Number one, he's fighting between 130 and 135. I think 130 is probably his more natural weight. I think you got to get Suarez to the U.S. I think you got to make him take a big chance. I don't think he's a name that you can say, okay, oh look, we got Suarez here. He fought in the Olympics. That can get him to that thing. He has to take a risk. He'll have to fight someone who, he's gonna have to take a 50-50 fight here. And I don't think he can do that in the Philippines. So I would get him to the U.S. as fast as possible. Partner up with somebody who can make that happen, and roll the dice.
All right. So our prediction here for the Eastern Communications Fearless Forecast is that, former Philippine national team member Charlie Suarez will win by decision.
Yeah, that's my pick.
And now the third member of our team for today, Boyet Season, has a special report on replacements. Boyet?
Thank you, Bill and Ryan. Alam niyo mga kaibigan, sa buhay, mahirap matanggap minsan ng maging number 2 ka, di ba? Nandyan yung hindi pagbibigay sa iyo ng respeto at kung minsan, hinahamak ang iyong pagkatao. Pero sa boxing ba, meron bang number 2? Now, for a fight card to be created in boxing, the matchmaker or yung taong nag-aayos kung sino yung maglalaban has the tough job of putting together a list of fighters who will go up against each other. Pero nangyayari na nagkakaroon ng pagbabago for one reason or another. And these last-minute dropouts or changes are the toughest on matchmakers who often must scramble at magkukumahog maghanap ng replacement or ng papalit dun sa hindi makakalaban. Minsan, pag sineswerte, makakuha ka ng fighter from the undercard and move him up to the semi-main event or the actual main event. Pwede rin na magtawag ka ng pusan. May mga large stable of contracted fighters dyan to replace a fighter who can't make it. At kung maganda naman ang relationship mo sa ibang mga matchmaker, you start making calls hoping someone who is in shape and licensed will be ready to go. Pero may mga konsiderasyon niya mga kaibigan. He must be able to make the weight limit unless it's a heavyweight fight or a side agreement has been reached. He also must be a licensed fighter in the state kung saan siya lalaban, which includes satisfying all the medical requirements. He must be good enough to be approved by that state's commission's governing body or another governing body. In the case of the Philippines, kailangan aprobado din po siya ng Games and Amusements Board. At ito pa isa, dapat katanggap-tanggap siya sa makakalaban niya, yung original fighter, doon sa kakalabanin niya. Him being the replacement fighter, dapat katanggap-tanggap siya doon sa kakalabanin niya. And he must also be approved by the network airing the fight in those instances where a television coverage is involved. Now, sino nga ba ang mga sikat na boksingero na naging replacement fighter? Isa dyan, mga kaibigan, ay si Manny Pacquiao na lumaban kay Lelo Libuaba na taga South Africa. Libuaba was actually scheduled to face Mexican Enrique Sanchez, the former WBA super bantamweight champion for the IBF belt. 2 weeks before the fight, Sanchez had to withdraw due to an injury. the promoters desperately searched for a replacement at nakita nilang itong skinny na payat na 22 anyos na Filipino na may blonde streak pa nga sa buhok who was training at the Wildcard Gym in Los Angeles, California as a walk-in aspirant. Now, Pacquiao was the WBC flyweight and international super bantamweight titleist at that time and had just started training with Freddie Roach before being called to substitute for the Ledwaba fight. The Filipino showed a bit of awkwardness in the first few minutes, but with hard shots, broke Ledwaba's nose towards the dying seconds of the first round. Now, Pacquiao immediately went for the kill and put pressure early in the second round. He knocked Ledwaba down with a perfectly timed left hand. Now, the champion, Ledwaba, recovered, but Pacquiao was simply unstoppable and floored Ledwaba with a booming left hand. But the champion was able to rise up, but another left hand sent Ledwaba crashing to the canvas, and referee Joe Cortez had nothing else to do but stop the fight immediately. Now, Ledwaba would eventually retire from boxing after losing to Maxwell Awuku on November 24th, 2006. And on July 3rd of this year, 2021, sumakabilang buhay po mga kaibigan si Lelo Ledwaba dahil sa COVID-19. Now, before Manny Pacquiao, another boxer, another Filipino boxer named Rolando Navarrete dominated the Philippine headlines. His nickname, the bad boy from the Yangas, ay bagay na bagay para sa kanya. He was well known for his very short fuse and often, kadalasan, nakikita dyan sa Dajangas na napapasali sa mga away-away at kung saan nung gulo dun sa kanilang lugar. Now, at his peak, Navarrete, who turned pro as a 16-year-old in 1973, was considered one of the most feared fighters in the world. He campaigned as a super featherweight in one of the division's best eras. In 1981, Cornelius Boza Edwards was a WBC super featherweight champion, winning the title from Bazooka Limon and then winning the first title defense by pummeling Bobby Chacon, who retired in the 13th round. Dahil dati, may championship rounds na umabot pa ng 15 rounds yan . Now, for his second title defense, Edwards was supposed to face Limon again. But Limon got bitten by the flu, so a replacement was needed. Now, Navarrete was already based in Honolulu at this point in his career, was supposed to fight Gerald Hayes that week and was offered a shot at the title, and he agreed to take the fight. So after a generally even first two rounds, Boza Edwards, or rather Navarrete, made tireless work and began to put a lot of body shots to negate Boza Edwards' height and reach advantage. Sa Italy po nangyari itong laban na to. Now, in what was easily one of the biggest upsets of the year, Navarrete dropped Boza Edwards twice in the fourth round before knocking him out in the fifth round. Now, kamakailan labang mga kaibigan, ay meron namang isang Cuban fighter na nahirang na maging replacement. Ito po ay ang nakalaban kamakailan ni Manny Pacquiao at siya po ay yung Yordenis Ugas. Si Yordenis Ugas, 35 taong gulang, had only been drafted in to face Pacquiao earlier in the month after the 8th Division World Champion's original opponent na si Errol Spence Jr. suffered an eye injury in training. Now, noong Mayo 2021, Manny Pacquiao announced on Twitter that he would be facing Errol Spence in Las Vegas on a Fox Sports pay-per-view. It will mark Pacquiao's first fight in 2 years. He would be fighting for Spence's WBC and IBF welterweight titles. Kaya lang, that all changed. Spence had to withdraw after he suffered, sabi ko nga, a retinal tear in his left eye. Now, rather than postpone Pacquiao's return until Spence recovered, premier boxing champions gave WBA super welterweight champion Yordenis Ugas a significant promotion. Ugas was actually scheduled to put his WBA title on the line against Fabian Maidana as the co-main event actually of the card. He was instead bumped up to fight Pacquiao in the main event. Now, it was a sorry loss for our pambansang kamao, but it was a sweet victory for Ugas, who had been awarded the WBA title after Pacquiao was stripped of the belt by the sanctioning body earlier this year for inactivity. And that resulted in your Dennis Ugas retaining his WBA title. Bill, Ryan, back to you.
And that's the final bell for today's edition of Round by Round presented by Eastern Communications. I'm Bill Velasco.
And I'm Ryan Sangalia. We're on Facebook at 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and on our YouTube channel right after. Like, follow, share, and subscribe now.
All right, tomorrow, a different set of us will be working the fights for you. Till then, take care. God bless. See you.